evening. Welcome to Skowhegan. I'm Katie Sonnenborn. I'm one of the directors here. We are thrilled to have such a nice group assembling for the conversation with Artadia. For those of you who are not familiar with Skowhegan, this is our second home. Our first home is in Maine. It's a residency program that was founded in 1946 by 4 artists who met in World War II and wanted to create a space for artists to work freely alongside one another. And since that time, we've had different generations come through for 70 years. Donna Huanca among them. We opened this space in 2014 as our kind of touchstone home in New York, and we have our archives, which are behind you, and this really wonderful program space where we can extend some of the conversations that happen on campus into a community where many of our artists live and work. One of the things that we wanted to do with this space was to open it up for like-minded peers and colleagues who might not have their own home in New York. We borrowed a lot of space over the years, and we were particularly pleased when Artadia came to us and asked if they could host one of these programs here. I think we share a commitment to supporting artists at a really critical moment in their professional careers, and some of you might know my co-director, Sarah Workman. She regularly talks about the impact that the grants make in Chicago, where she lived for almost a decade, and I know that that's true in all the cities where the program operates. I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn Ramo, their executive director, and look forward to meeting many of you after the program. Thank you both for coming tonight. It's really nice when there's a connection between our collegial organizations having events here and Skowhegan, and so it's great if you're coming with the class of 2006, right? And we're glad to have you back in this way.
Glad to be back.
Good. Thank you.
So I just wanted to introduce the program and why you guys are all here tonight. So Artadia is 16 years old. We give curator-driven direct grants to artists in 7 cities across the country. One of the things we recognized is that artists want and need more support beyond funding. So we created a program called Art and Dialogue, where we invite curators from all over the world to visit our 7 cities and do studio visits with a selection of our over 300 awardees. So Kristan Kennedy was invited to come and do studio visits with some of our New York-based artists and awardees, including Donna. And Donna is an Artadia awardee as of our first New York awardee class, which was in 2015. So we're very excited to have this program in New York, but all over the country. And the idea is that we also can partner, as Sarah mentioned, and Katie mentioned, with also like-minded institutions to create a public program and a public forum and a public conversation beyond the studio visits that have a direct dialogue between artists and curators. Now there's a way for you guys to also be part of that dialogue. So I wanted to introduce Kristan a little bit further. She's a Portland, Oregon-based artist, curator, and educator. She is the visual art curator at PICA, the Portland Institute of Contemporary Art. The last decade, Kennedy has focused on commissioning new work by international emerging artists in the form of large-scale, site-specific installations and solo projects that exist at the borders of genres. She also organizes music, performance art, publications, and new media projects as part of PICA's year-round programming and for the organization's annual time-based art festival. Kristan's also a teacher. She teaches contemporary art history at the Portland State University, where she directed the MFA Visiting Artist Program and lecture series, and she's also a practicing artist. Donna, as we mentioned, is an Artadia awardee. She's going to speak about her work, so I'm not going to get too far into that, but she stages surreal architectural collages activated by live performers. She's born in Chicago. She studied at the Stadel School in Frankfurt, as well as Skowhegan, as we know. She was awarded a Fulbright scholarship to live and work in Mexico City in 2012, and she's also a recipient of an Art Matters grant in 2010. You might have seen her work at the Independent Fair last weekend with Perez Project, where she's going to have a show in Berlin in September. She's also done a lot of shows locally, including at Art in General. and internationally including a show called Water Scars, Valentine Paris, and also the Art Berlin Contemporary in Berlin. She divides her time between New York and Berlin, right? And I'm gonna let you guys take it away. This is an informal conversation, although both artists and curator are going to introduce their work, and then we'll also open for questions at the end. So thank you all for being here. Thank you guys for being here. And thanks to Skowhegan as well.
I just wanted to take a minute to thank Donna for being up here with me, and also Artadia for inviting me. I've had a few days and one more day of studio visits, which have been really incredible and great practice for having a conversation with an artist. I kept pretending there was an audience in every studio visit, which is something maybe curators should do. And also to Skowhegan for hosting the talk. It's really great. I think that we have decided that I'm going to talk a little bit about my curatorial perspective, which would really be about like what my curatorial influence has been on me, and has developed that perspective. And then Donna and I are going to start talking about her work and kind of move into that. And both of us, even though it's not the standard, have hundreds of slides. So we're going to try to move through them really quickly. And if you have questions about something, I'm fine with being interrupted. Although I know some people in the audience, and the people that I know aren't allowed to interrupt me, just for their own pleasure. I grew up in New York. I grew up in Brooklyn, real Brooklyn, old Brooklyn, and in a neighborhood that's in between Sheepshead Bay and Gravesend. And I just learned that Sheepshead is a fish, even though I should have known that. And I always thought it was literally sheep's head, and was like, kind of stay away from our neighborhood. We're ugly and mean out here, and had a lot of pride about that. And now, like, I'm watching, the new Brooklyn kind of encroach on my family neighborhood. It's interesting to come back continually and see New York change and grow and become Portland, where I moved 20 years ago. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So the slide that's up right now is a cake that we made for A.L. Steiner's exhibition at PICA, where I work, which is the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art. It opened 20 years ago in 1995, which both Donna and I are from the 90s, so that's good. We have a shared language in that way too. And it says the patriarchy is a pyramid scheme, although it kind of looks like patriarchy and a lot of other things. My assistant Roz, who is a dream, is been subversively making drawings of things that I say, unaware, and she made the mistake of showing them to me, so there's a few of them scattered through the presentation. But really, I am an artist posing as a curator, and depending on who I talk to, they'll argue with me about which I am. Like, oh no, you're a curator. Oh no, you're an artist. And I think from a very young age, I identified as an artist, and I knew I was one. And my parents are here, so they could probably attest to it. My mom was an artist, like almost every member of my family, immediate and extended, is an artist in some way. And so I've never had an identity crisis about that, but I definitely have an identity crisis about being a curator. The woman who kind of brought me closest to that is the founder of PICA. Her name's Kristan. This is a really goofy photo of her from the time that she founded PICA when she was 28 years old in 1995 in a city that really didn't have a sort of commitment to contemporary art at all. The art museum has had an abysmal record of supporting living artists or the work of our time. And she was working there, running a program called Art on the Edge with the great curator John Weber. And the program started to get, dwindled down in favor of like large shows about Fabergé eggs and other kind of big ticket items. And so she went to a small group of funders in a backyard and said, I think I have an idea to start something else that would bring sort of the art of right now into Portland and would be multidisciplinary and nomadic and itinerant, and let's try that. And people said yes. And I think that culture of yes that Christy really generated and was very formative in me. I moved to Portland in 1994 to follow kind of a collaborative spirit that I had found in college at Alfred State, and also because New York scared the living shit out of me. And it wasn't the New York that I had grown up with, which was a really scary place, because there was, East New York was on fire, there was Summer of Sam, Yusef Hawkins was beat in the Bronx, and there were many, many other things, scary things going on in New York at the time. But the New York that scared me after being in like this like bucolic area of Alfred and making work with people outside of like a commodity-based structure was really like the gallery system and the museum system. I didn't understand it, I didn't feel like I belonged, but I also was really young and immature and idealistic. So I'm not saying it actually was that way, it was just my perception of it. And so I ran away to the West Coast, and I really didn't know what I was doing, and I don't know now what I'm doing there 20 years later. The first exhibition I remember seeing, and that has still stayed with me, is the Treasures of Tutankhamun exhibition, which we called, I think my mom took me. I remember the rooms of the museum, I remember the things in the museum. I remember sitting on the museum floor in some like educational engagement thing happening. And I also remember this from the same time period, and I think it is one of those moments I realized that like culture is simultaneous and speaking to each other from all different vantage points, high and low. And this was a way, Steve Martin, like kind of like tearing apart this popular exhibition, or like a phenomenon that was happening all over New York and all over the world at the time through like this subversive comedy was more where my allegiance lied. And it was a way, it informed the exhibition for me, it didn't take away from it, and I think that's something that stayed with me. When I say New York was a scary place when I was coming of age, I mean that when I was riding the subway, or when I was at church, or when I was anywhere, people were dying of AIDS all over the place, and we knew it. And it was also the first time that I really understood the politics of art, and the things that ACT UP was doing and Grand Fear were doing were images and symbols that really resonated with me and felt super powerful. And I had a job in downtown New York for a little bit early on in college, and the protests were going on all around where I worked. And it was a place where I found my people who were angry, because I felt like there were many, many other people who were staying quiet. I usually have pictures of my parents in here, but I took them out because they're right there and you can look at them. And they were really informative also, and because of their idiosyncratic interests. But my other parent at the time was a guy named Len Ballinger, who still teaches at Fontbonne Hall Academy for Young Women in Brooklyn, where I went. And he's an incredible artist, and this is a picture of him in the early 70s. He was one of the first artists to have a studio at PS1, which I just learned about. So I knew he was a working artist, even though he was kind of in this like far-flung area of Brooklyn at this like not cool all-girls school. And his art room was like a real, true radical center. The classes that he taught, one was called visual perception, et cetera, and so forth, were the kinds of classes that people are just starting to teach at the college level right now. And he was doing it for Catholic school girls in Brooklyn. This is a picture of my parents' bookshelf. When I talk about idiosyncratic, you can see that I would stare at this bookshelf forever. And there was E. Cummings and sexual disorders, and like the Summerhill book about radical education, and the Conscientious Objector's Handbook, and like weird religious books about like Catholic mysticism, like Thomas Merton. And I didn't really read any of them, but I would stare at the spines and maybe like dip in a little bit, and things like this have been persistent images in my mind for the last 35 or 40 years, where I can never get this cover out of my head or that image out of my head just because it was there in front of me. This was my first poster that I hung in my college dorm room, and if that lets you know the kind of work I was looking at or thinking about when I was there, and I still think about this, and it's still really prevalent. And this is the first real performance that I ever saw. Oh. Oh, I know.
Which holds one race superior and
So for those of you who don't know, did anyone watch this live?
inferior.
A few people.
Is
So
finally
I remember like being allowed to stay up and watch SNL, and I don't really know why, but
discredited
and I loved Sinead O'Connor at the time, and I understood she was like making this protest against apartheid and maybe the Pope, and it felt really powerful that she was like reanimating this song, and it was this a cappella version, and it was just her alone at the mic. It was completely staggering at the time. It was really like you were fixed to the television, watching it, and it goes on for a while in a really normal way. And then she gets to the end and it really starts to take off.
We know we will win. We have confidence in the victory of good over evil. Fight the real enemy.
The most powerful moment of the performance, I think, wasn't like ripping up the picture of the Pope, which was pretty rad at the time, especially for like a young Catholic girl who was like rebelling inside against some of the really complicated issues that church was facing, and that I couldn't make sense of in my head even from as a small age. Like I loved my environment and some of the like good works for humanity that organization promoted, but I couldn't understand the racism, sexism, homophobia, and other things that were happening in that moment. And of course, rampant child abuse. So this was the first time I had seen like a broad, I'm sure there are other moments, but for me, this was the moment where something real happened on television, and television from, you know, whatever our neighborhood was called, was really, you know, the place I looked at art most of the time. And the most powerful moment in this is just the sheer silence afterwards, because nobody knew what to do, and you understood that it was live and it wasn't supposed to happen. And then the kind of firestorm that happened afterwards was even more thrilling. And I just knew that whatever that was about, that was the kind of art or performance that I wanted to be involved in. So whatever was like sort of radicalized from the inside and pushing at the sides and making people fall silent and making them uncomfortable sometimes was where I wanted to be. And maybe to a fault, I've leaned to that side at some points. And then I think that somehow like that kind of exposure to like death and conflict and all those things through images, art, you know, society at the time, has made me sort of look at death and the kind of underbelly of things as a real point of departure to have conversations. This is a small clip from the movie Play It Again, Sam.
This stuff just knocks me out. Do you realize we're in a room that holds some of the highest achievements of Western civilization?
There's no girls.
Oh, look at that wall. Oh.
It's pretty.
Yeah. If you could have any painting, what would you pick?
A Van Gogh. Any Van Gogh.
Me too. I feel some sort of a mystical attraction for Van Gogh. Why is that?
I don't know. I just know he was a great painter, and he cut off his ear for a girl that he loved.
That's the kind of thing you do for a girl.
I'd really have to like her a lot.
I wonder if Nick would cut his ear off for me.
I don't think you ought to ask him. He's been very busy lately.
Must be fantastic to be loved so intensely.
So why don't we split and see if there's any action up at the Berkeley Museum?
Okay.
It's ridiculous.
Hey, now there's one.
She's great.
Go ahead, Phil, speak to her.
No, I'm kidding.
No, go on before the room is. Come on, go on, give it a try. That's what we're here for, honey. Come on, go on.
Casual, casual. It's quite a lovely Jackson Pollock, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
What does it say to you?
It restates the negativeness of the universe, the hideous, lonely emptiness of existence, nothingness, the predicament of man forced to live in a barren, godless eternity, like a tiny flame flickering in an immense void with nothing but waste, horror and degradation, forming a useless, bleak straitjacket in a black, absurd cosmos.
What are you doing Saturday night?
Committing suicide.
What about Friday night?
I would say I was a nihilist, but I'm not. I'm more of a realist, I think. But I've always really responded to, number one, that kind of conversation that happens in the space of art that is both like personal and professional and weirded out. And also always loved that woman because I understood. I always wanted to be like angsty like that and could never pull it off. You know? So I'm into her. This is the artist Dawn Casper, and she was part of last year's Time-Based Art Festival. And when we started talking about what she wanted to do, I think the conversation kind of landed on this idea that we're living in the age of anxiety, and what do you do with that kind of feeling, and how do you work with it? And also as an artist who has had many different kinds of shows and was shifting her practice into more sound work, like was there an opportunity to let that play out over time? And so Dawn came to the festival and we made a space for her to her specifications, which were really broad and vague and maybe like a blank canvas in some way. And she was there for 10 days making a composition in the space and basically figuring it out. Here's one of the moments that felt like that. So Dawn had sort of permission from a lot of the artists and myself to move through this 22,000 square foot warehouse. But she had stayed pretty like squarely inside of the space, and then suddenly, in a very long performance, she dragged her drum set outside to perform to the street. I wish I had it on tape, but there was sort of a Keystone Cops moment where the guy next door, Chase, like was watching and about like maybe called someone about the racket next door, and Dawn like artfully performed her way back into the space, while also acknowledging that he was the creep and she wasn't. And it was a really beautiful performance, and Dawn continued to kind of build a soundtrack for this exhibition about what spirit was or what anxiety was or the unnamed thing over the course of those 10 days. The exhibition that was open the day I started, Pica, was one called De-Racism, and it was a major solo show with the artist William Popel, and this was a backwards United States made out of hundreds of rotting hot dogs, which I had also helped install with a number of other volunteers. And my first interaction with Pica was protesting them. My second was as a volunteer. My third was as an artist in their program. My fourth was on their board. My fifth was as their PR person, which was a very weird role. And my last incarnation is as curator. So when I say that I come to that title kind of late and also strangely, it's because I've been on every side of that institution, and curator felt like this really important role that I wasn't sure how to embody, especially walking into a show as powerful as this. It also really smelled, and I just found the comments book from it, which I passed on to Popel, where people just wrote about the stench in the room, and then also talked about racism, and it feels really incredible now that he's having like his real true moment in the art world, as we're facing all these issues of like inherent systemic racism in our society right now. This is an image of our then preparator York Jacoby and a couple of assistants moving a felled tree that Matt J. Jackson had identified as something he wanted to work with in 2006. And if there's anything that I never expected to do as a curator, it was move a tree into a river, convince the preparator to go get a jet ski, have him come back, pull the tree into the river, drag it to a boat ramp, and drag it into the space. And like every day I'm finding like 400 bananas or doing one of these activities, because the work that people are coming to make at PICA has not been tried, it hasn't been tested, and it's our first time to try, test it, and see it. And I know as little as the artist does. We're kind of in it together, and they have to do a major trust fall to come to PICA, because we don't have a formal space. We're going into all these random exhibition spaces. This is a piece we did in an old warehouse in 2006 for Larry Bamberg, who has a show up right now at Simone Sebal Gallery. I think Larry future forecasted the contemporary art world's love of fluorescent lighting. And this was, you know, like little bits of detritus and stuff in monofilament, and it was being blown around the room by ceiling fans, and it kind of looked like nature, but obviously it wasn't. It was about sort of the suspension of disbelief. And then years later, we took over this abandoned high school, which we had to convert from nothing into something. In the center of it was a 600-seat theater, and I should say that the work that I do and that PICA does kind of crosses over all of the boundaries of art making and performance, and performing art is a really important part of the visual art program, and some of the issues that museums and other spaces are facing now about how to include performance art or how to include dance are things that mid-range multidisciplinary art centers across the country in Chicago, Minneapolis, Portland, San Francisco, Boston have been doing for years and absolutely understand and live. So some of that conversation and learning can come from the provinces where people were free to kind of move across those boundaries without like curators fighting each other for space in institutions. One of the exhibitions that I made at the school was called Evidence of Bricks. It came from a quote from my brother, who was talking about a time he had been sort of harassed on the street, and he said, brick sales are about to go up, and he was referring to Stonewall, but I kind of have this image of people going out and buying bricks and throwing them. And so TBA, the festival opens in September. I started collecting all these images of what was happening. I couldn't have predicted Arab Spring or the Occupy movement. Both happened during the run of the exhibition. And so this kind of radicality that I was seeing in artist practice that my own family was feeling about this, where was revolution going to happen, started to happen right in the midst of the exhibition. This piece is by Claire Fontaine. It is a right side United States made out of 100,000 matches that were put in by hand through volunteers. And it was not lost on me that I was sort of flipping an image that was one of the first images I had seen at PICA in another exhibition by another curator, Stuart Karodner, who was also the very first person to represent Pope Al. There was also a project by a group of regional artists called Occupation Preoccupation. Again, this is prior to Occupy movement. It happened during the show. And it was about people coming together and singing songs from nations where we occupy the military. Then Occupy happened, and this is our version of the protest. It actually was larger than the one in Zuccotti Park, because Portland has to beat everyone in terms of who's going to come out on the streets. But it was a really powerful moment. And in that same year, we had this 40-foot elephant jump house that people could walk into. Jesse Sugarman made 3 minivans kind of crash in this monument to Lee Iacocca. Erica Vogt made field debris, which we commissioned entirely, and then wound up at LACMA and the New Museum and other places with PICA erased from the history of the work. And Kate Gilmore built a 5,000-pound clay block and had 5 women tear it apart to make a new video piece. Of course, the school was empty and being filled by these artist projects, and then all of a sudden during the festival it gets filled with people, and that's really where the work starts to perform, and the audience starts to perform, and the performers start to perform, and it all comes together. And we have this history of kind of using this idea of transforming a kind of dead space or deadness into something that's living with people. And I would say above anything, I'm curating people over objects, and there are curators who like to arrange objects and ideas, and I really like to bring people together through exhibition making. This is a project by Anna Craycroft where we turned our headquarters into a school for 3 months, and she brought in 24 artists to teach classes about how we understand each other through different languages. This is a project I worked on with Emily Royston for 2 years, where we commissioned a new body of work about time. It was supposed to be a dance and wound up an exhibition. Andrea Geyer, Lisa Radon, Jennifer West. I'm showing these images to honor the artists, but also to show you that what's interesting to me about them is that they all look really still and calm. And the making of it was like furious and uncontrolled and scary, because they show up to a warehouse like this, and we're building the space around them. This is the room that we just used for an installation by Bill Jenkins, who is a recent Artadia Award winner. And when I walked in and saw all these holes in the ceiling and knew we were trying to make a piece that was about rerouting light through a system of elaborate ducts, I said, oh, this is Bill's room. But I wondered if Bill would take an 8,000 square foot, open to the elements, like rotting warehouse space. And he did, after a little cajoling. And then we started to build this piece. And one of the things that happens in the making of something is that there are lots of people involved. And one of the things that I asked if I could talk to Bill about tonight was just this, sort of the nerves involved of taking on a project that large, something that comes from like a well-seated idea in this practice, but is about to be like blown apart in this new environment, and new place, and how like the concerns upon arrival were like, could he pull it off? Could we pull it off? Pica meaning, and then suddenly there were all these people helping him construct this thing in a warehouse together. We were eating meals together, and it really became not about like what the art world thought about it, or what the press was going to think about it, or even maybe how it related to other things in his practice, but about the very people who were putting their hands on the work and the people who were going to show up in that vicinity. And what I think happens when you're curating outside of a market center is that you really have to face your audience in a really different way, and address the fact that like art is happening everywhere, and that people make it, and there's labor involved, and sort of an illusion. The veneer is like easier to lift in Portland than it is in other places. Another exhibition we did of Aboriginal painting, and some other spaces that transform from like multicolored, who knows what's it, into spaces for exchange about work, and exhibitions by Khalil Huffman, more images of Dawn's performance. And sort of where I'll end is sort of talking about how some of those early influences are about ethics, politics, human interaction, kindness, and survival have come into the way that I work at PICA. It's part of the founding principles of the organization, but it's also, one of my founding principles as well. And so when artists come in and they're extremely vulnerable and they're trying something new, one of the things I'm most proud about for Portland is that the audience always comes out in droves to sit with them, and kind of reserves judgment for later. And over the last 20 years of PICA's engagement and artist-run spaces in Portland and formal spaces in Portland, there's sort of been like a language of visiting artists developed, that we like host them, and we also like support their improvisation and our presence. And that includes artists from all generations and work that needs to be seen again. We republished this book, Weird Fucks, for the wonderful Lynn Tillman, along with New Herring Press, with paintings from Amy Silman. And I was surprised when they came. They said, I don't think anyone would really do this for us. I can't believe a publication is an exhibition. And I was like, well, in this day and age, I don't know why it isn't. And just maybe returning to my roots a little bit, this year at TBA, we held this artist, Holcomb Waller, did a performance piece called LGBT Requiem, where he wrote a mass for all of those who have died or perished because of AIDS. And it was a real like coming home to sit in a church and listen to a contemporary artist like gather an interfaith choir to do this like really contemporary piece of music and language, and it felt sort of like peacemaking with some of that time. And the piece is now going to tour the world. Where am I now? Sort of like carrying my curatorial ego and my artist ego in a backpack around with me all the time. And in it is this like sort of idea that I articulated in a short piece for a newish organization called Common Field about institutionalized spaces, deinstitutionalized spaces, artist-run spaces, and et cetera. Really advocating for support of their very nebulous and unconstructed and not anointed practice by what we call the art world. And also to keep this sort of like magical thinking alive about believing in the immaterial. This is maybe the first movie I saw. I think it was Fantasia and Close Encounters in the same year. And Fantasia I fell asleep in, and Close Encounters is still my favorite movie. And this movie is definitely about artistic practice. He sits there at his table in front of his family, he's all crying, and he starts to make this mashed potato mountain based on a vision, and they don't understand him, and he says, like, I know this is scary, and I don't know what it's, you don't know what it's about, but I know it's important. And I would say that that is like at the core of where I think artistic practice lives. Like, we don't know what it means yet, and we're terrified by it, but we absolutely know it's important and needs to be seen. Donna is sitting here next to me, so I'm gonna stop like giving a manifesto and talk about why I was interested in her work. And that I approached her after seeing images online, which is another thing that is maybe like unpopular for curators to say. A lot of them are curating from their desks and their Instagram accounts and all these other things, and it takes a while sometimes to get into an artist studio, especially from Portland, Oregon, when the artist is living between Berlin and New York and Mexico City and traveling around. Like, our correspondence was our first meeting, and the images online, which she controls and doesn't control, were my first entry into her work. And I think in thinking about like destabilizing an exhibition space with bodies, and that there's some ways that happen with it, you know, quite traditionally, like performance art or maybe dance happening in a space, or comedy or some other kind of performance art. This was a moment where I saw bodies like interacting with static objects in conversation with them, and wanted to know more about what it was about. So Donna will come to PICA at some point for a new program we have called Creative Exchange Lab, where we bring artists of different disciplines together to really just think and talk about their practice over time. And we're gonna shift to her video.
Great, thanks Kristan. Thanks everybody for coming. I think it's like so, meeting Kristan was like really, I think, special because we spoke the same language. I also came from being, working at a museum, and then ended up being a sound curator, which was such a strange position to be in, because the word curator for an artist can be like really difficult, because, and at that time I really didn't have the experience I have now, but what can I do for the artists? And you know, looking at the way that you're working with an artist, and for me it's really, you know, more like a residency, or kind of like an entry to experimentation, which I think is super important for an artist. I mean, when I went to Skowhegan in 2006, I was kind of working within two different practices. One side making like noise music and performances that were just for one night, putting pickup mics in my sewing machine, and I did some performances like that at Skowhegan in the woods as well. But then also making like these really formalist kind of collages with clothing that were supposed to be based on painting, but using like clothing for my family and friends. And so it was like, you know, trying to like deal with what is art, and one looked like, you know, classic painting or referencing, and the other one was just like an immediate urge that I had to perform and collaborate, because I started playing drums when I was really young, and before I went to art school, before I thought I could combine them. So Skowhegan was really an important, you know, catalyst for me to really understand, by seeing other artists do, you know, what they were doing, things that I really didn't like, but just the freedom involved in what could be art, what art could be, And so I started to kind of blend those things. And after Skowhegan, from 2006 to basically 2013, I was kind of nomadic, like living wherever a residency or a grant would take me, and just, kind of experiment and really make work based off of what was immediately around me, which were my friends, clothing, just these, spaces. I did performances in subways and, courtyards, just all based on just these connections and this urgency to collaborate with others. This video is my friend Maria Chavez, who's a sound artist. She had, this was right about the time she was closing she had like a men's vintage store, and we took the inventory and I just made this like version of an ekeko, which is the Andean like god of abundance, which is mostly representing like the male in the family. Every spring would be this ritual to, kind of collect what the family needed for the rest of the year and wrap it around the body. And so I'm gonna show that. Maria and I later went to make a sound project called Curator, where where she would take she was Peruvian and I'm Bolivian, so we would kind of find that connection of what, I was in charge of the visual and she was in charge of the audio. So she would take like old records, break them, paint them, and then make these abstract collages. But this is an ekeko, and this is Evo Morales, who was the president of Bolivia until recently, I think. So growing up, I went to Bolivia a lot every summer, so it was just like, and then being the rest of the year in Chicago, living kind of these two lives. So these were my fondest memories, going and partying, like in amongst these like carnival, like loud performances. And this is Pachamama. So yeah, this was kind of this started before Skowhegan, but went on to like 2012. This is just like an example of like a performance. We would just kind of go set up random pieces and then just improvise a new work. And here I'm pouring rocks on pickup mics. It wasn't really anything it's more like trying to find this moment, right? It's like when I make work, I just think about it like I'm in a sauna and I'm not like a steam room, and I don't really know where I'm going or where the door is, but just kind of like trying to feel out what to do next. So that like sense of like not knowing is really important in my work. So that's what the collaborations with the models have turned into. So this was when I was just didn't have a studio, just kind of would like pick up random pieces that I would find like vintage store, or like not even vintage store, but like flea markets, and those were the materials that would be reinserted in works. So this was at like an art in Miami Basel, I think like in 2010, in a corner where everyone was like, what the hell is going on? And
what about that, about like presenting work in an art fair context, because you just went through that?
yeah.
Is there any space for experimentation?
Well, it depends on how uninvolved whoever's presenting you is, and I'm very new to the commercial side of the art world. I've never really wanted to think about these things of what is the audience. I really like the audience encountering moments that would, not be normally encountered in the context like of an art fair, which is to me like completely ridiculous to like think about buying it like in a mall setting and just having like, it's like, to me, I think about everything like what's, the architecture and who's next to me, and I take everything into consideration, when I'm making an installation. So this was just within this box, like this just like kind of like a glitch in what was happening all around us. So this is like a one-night performance that was also based on the ekeko, where the model was, she was standing for like 2 hours, I believe, and kind of moving around, but like there's this sense of, yeah, like duration that happens. I always like, you know, collaborate with the models. I feel like I tell them what I would like, but in the end, I encourage their improvisation. So this is more like a formal shoot. It's just stuff I was making like when I didn't have a studio. And these are unwearable shoe sculptures, collages, magazine collages.
Did this work travel with you, or did the material travel with you, or how was it brought into other things?
Yeah, usually it was like me just wanting to find the materials I was comfortable with, you know, and everything had to fit. I used to travel with 2 suitcases, 50-pound suitcases, one for personal and one for materials, and a lot of them would, you know, intertwine, this, for example, was a dress that I wanted to wear and ended up being, you know, like a material in artworks that is still kind of ongoing. Like these pieces aren't ever meant to be stored or put away or seen as art. They're just kind of, you know, captured in a photo, and then their life continues, you know. So this was, I went to Peru on this Art Matters grant, and I traveled to all these different towns that had my last name, Huanca, so Huancavelica, Huancayo, and I was just trying to blend into the landscape. So I'm inside of here I am in the corner, like bundled up in this red little patch of clothing. I'm in this ditch over here. This is me looking at all the different types of women from the area and trying to see which one I am, fit in. So that was, you know, this more like literally like, yeah, just like nomadic work. And then from these travels, I collected all these objects that were, I thought, had a life of their own, and I kept on, you know, going with me through in my suitcase. And then I finally presented them in this theatrical way. It was a 4-channel sound piece that CCS barred for one of the curators' final project. And in the speakers, I had my mother and my father speaking, and well, my father is like a Quechuan. He speaks fluent Quechuan, and my mom's more like a Spanish side. So he was teaching her how to speak Quechuan in the speakers, and they would travel around the space. So this is I made this sculpture based off of a dance, Quechuan dance called Tinku, and just kind of etched my own language into the piece of wood. And this is a quipu, which is like a 3-dimensional recording device. And this is just like a silver mining bag that I had found. So this is kind of coming out of like what I went into Skowhegan with, which is kind of really focusing on like my genetic identity or where I was from, and trying to piece together all these like, you know, just coming of age type works that I was really like focused on. Who am I, or what am I doing? This is when I moved to Mexico City in 2012 to really I want to work in Latin America, where it's like the most international place that I can get contacts in, and it was Mexico City. And these were a presentation of these garments that I had collected and dipped in paint, and just saw them as like characters in a language that would reappear. So, and these were just tacked in the room. This was at a gallery that I had seen online, but actually thought that was just like a PDF. It wasn't a real space, but it ended up being a real space, and I got to make the piece there. So this is in the end of 2012 after my Mexico City escapade, and this is the first time I started to use live models in the performances to, you know, I was asked to do a performance, and, you know, I wanted to activate the sculptures, and so I had found these 2 art students. They were really enthusiastic about working together, so this went on for about 2 hours, and they would essentially, like, the directions were like just kind of like disrespect the paintings, or, just kind of walk around, but it was really like a silent, I see them as like passive aggressive performances because they're very, people are expecting something to happen and nothing really does.
How did they disrespect the paintings? I mean,
Well, like stomping on them and, like spitting on them, I tell them to rub as much as they want, and in the end they ended up, I call it Sade and DMT, or no, this was Sade Room, but I had taken one of my favorite Sade songs and slowed it down so they danced together. And
did you learn anything? I mean, what do you learn from the collaborators that you work with in these installations? Because I feel like you started off letting them experiment with the work, and now some of them are directing some of the work or leading you to new things. Like how closely are you working with them?
We work really closely together. It's like afterwards we're together. It's like this really really tight relationship. I mean, here I met them. We do like 3 or 4 rehearsals, and we just kind of, I just present the stage basically, and I'm like, what would you like to do, or how do you feel like you can, contribute and fit in what's comfortable for you? So, in the end, some performers like to have direction, and some really like to give a lot of, input. So we just find, a happy medium. And when it's happening, I'm always surprised because they do things they said, they just improvise, and that's kind of exciting to see the work change in front of me.
Did you start using other people so that you could see the work, or why did you remove yourself from the?
Yeah, because I was the one in the performances at first, and I was so gutted by making everything and then being there and not really having. I guess I think about it like being in a band. It's good to have someone else there so that you can talk about what happened instead of it just being all about what you just did and not really having a mirror, So I like to work with pairs. So the models, and also like models that don't really know each other, and build, this kind of connection between them during the performance. And afterwards also, it just allows me to just see the piece unveil as well, because it's never really finished. And there's, all these works were made on site. Usually I've agreed to always talk to whoever I'm working with to let me be there for about 2 weeks and collect materials from whatever city I'm in. And this one was interesting because it was behind glass, so it was like just this like protective incubator that the models were in, and I set up a lot of pieces with them, and they ended up going and doing what they wanted to do.
Just like my images, also like when we have this documentation, like the audience is almost always removed.
Yeah.
Which as I was putting my presentation together, I was like, this is ridiculous, This is not how art lives. I mean, a lot of times exhibitions sit empty, that's a fact, but most of the time there's someone like confronting the work, or the work is confronting them, and we don't see it. So have you found these gallery spaces or these exhibition opportunities as spaces that allow for the models, the one documenting the audience interaction? How do you understand what's happening with them in the room?
I feel really like high tension when I'm watching the performance. I see, like nobody really knows what to do. The models are doing their thing, and then the audience is like always like a politely, keeping a distance.
That sounds like just looking at artwork in general.
Yeah, and it's just like this, like breathe, like people don't even breathe. Like I can hear them like stressing out, and this, different, languages that have that. It's nice when I don't know what people are saying, but I don't know. It's just like this tension that's like unfolding in front of you.
But what have they learned? Like, what have your collaborators learned?
Oh, well, they tell me a lot. Like after the piece is done, I always ask them to write like a statement and let me know what was going on in their heads. Because I try to hang out with them as much as I can, and this piece was went on like for 4 weeks, not continuously, but every week there was a different performance, and so yeah, they learn. I mean, they'll tell me certain works like protected them or they felt safe in these certain areas. Not that they didn't feel safe in other areas, but there was this, you know, they tell me more about the work than I know, and I made it, you know. So it's like I also have I have a distance with work. I don't really see it as precious. So a lot of, like I said, a lot of the work was basically made from trash and, you know, went back to trash, or I picked out what I wanted and kept the material moving. So yeah, it's like they'll tell me like, you know, I was following this line, or that I really like this moment, and you know, they'll write poems about it. It's like kind of like an out-of-body experience for a lot of them, because it'll go on for a minimum of 3 hours, and has gone on, like the one in Berlin went on for 8 hours a day, 4 days, for 4 days straight. And afterwards we would, the models and I would hang out and just go out, party all night. So it was just like this family afterwards. So it was nice,
But it also seems like, you know, you talked about how critical this space of experimentation was through, you know, living nomadically, moving from sort of residency to residency, and having these opportunities to experiment and not perfect and not have things on view except by other artists or, you know, maybe the townspeople in these residency spaces. But what has it been like to move people into the exhibition space? Like, do you feel a need to solidify your practice? Do you still feel like you're experimenting? Are you leaving the people in there to like resist just leaving objects
yeah.
alone?
Well, it's hard for me to think about like what happens after the show is up, I guess. You know, it's like this exhibition that goes on for 6 weeks, so like the normal run. And that's not the interesting part for me. It's like the interesting part is when it's all being seen together with the performers. So now with these new series of works, which kind of were based off of like these details of the body that I was, you know, really like zooming in on, showing the audience things that they would normally not see because they're so scared to get close to the models. So then I've created these new paintings based off of that, and actually finding, trying to paint the painting as like the energy of the performance. So it's like a reversed entry, you know. So just details. And these were kind of like the tombs of the materials that I had been using for years. They would be sandwiched in plexiglass, and essentially it was really, yeah, it's like hard for me because these materials have been living with me and becoming different forms for so many years that now it's like set in stone, like they're dead. So it's a pure pair of pants that have been several lives. So
Do you use sound in your work anymore?
yeah, I do. I'm working on a large piece for the fall with I'm really into instruments that are based on intuition, like a theremin or chaos pad. There's some instruments that you really don't know. You don't really need to know how to play it. So those are the kind of instruments that I'm going to amplify, and also have them be response to the audience. So the audience presence. So yeah, it's been like, I've been wanting to go back, but it's, my brain hasn't like fused both sides, like the visual and the oral. So now it's like, now I'm trying to blend them again. This is a performance that happened this summer with another artist, and so I was trying to find, like space for the performance to live in. So they would rub on the walls, and these would be the remains, and so some paintings with makeup. So this is the most recent piece in Riga, Latvia. Art in General brought me there for 10 days, and everything was made there with pieces that I would find in Latvia.
So you carry some of the material around with you through your practice over the last like decade or more.
Mhm.
Do the performers come with you, or are they new in each place?
Some of them do. Here we couldn't, like I've actually found like 4 girls that are completely dedicated and will go with me. They've gone to Paris and Berlin and London. And I would like to, yeah, what I am doing is building like a family, like a database, or, you know, and so I'm just still trying to learn about what their, you know, what their final contribution, it's not like ever ending, you know, it's just kind of continuing. So, like this girl Gabby, she never been to the States, never been to New York, and she came and stayed with me, and she's like going to a dance school here. She's just was visiting, but yeah, it's like an ongoing relationship that's built because they surprise me, and it's just like a nice, you know, it's like to see your work unfold that way, or not even have like, you know, just to see whatever objects that you're making interact with like, you know, beings.
And you talked about them dancing in like one of the first incarnations of this work. Do you, like, it's interesting to hear you say you're building a family or a database, this is the difference between like a visual artist working with bodies or movement, or a performing artist like building a company. You know, they would say, oh, we're building a company, and there would be these like clear rules between like who the choreographer is and who the movers are, and like who has ownership over it. But a family is like mutable and like exchanges ideas, and you're sort of not sure at a point like who owns them.
Right.
How do you feel about like having like being, you know, Donna, who is the artist, and the people being, you know, more material, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. It's sort of, because it's just getting to a point where I do feel that I'm comfortable with these new works that show like a performative side, and the model isn't required to be there. For me to have the energy that I want to create when making an installation, and yeah, I don't know, it's like still developing, because I don't know, I feel really close to them, and I really care about what they're contributing, and what they, you know, are comfortable with, and any, you know, suggestions, like, you know, they want to give. But yeah, it is strange to think about, you know, them being amaterial, but in a sense, like, they are, you know, and me, like, as a woman, feeling okay with that, you know, it's like something that I'm still working on, I guess.
I have sort of one more question, and then I hope maybe there's questions from the audience, but the question came out of a conversation that I had the other night with a friend about whether or not New York is a place where art can be made, or it's a good place for artists to be.
Get out.
No, because you're living between 2 different cities, and you're traveling, and you're showing internationally. Like,
Yeah.
what does New York give you or not give you, or what do you need from New York now?
It took me a really long time to understand. When I first moved here, it was right after Skowhegan again, which is so important to me. It was in 2007, and I was invited to do residency called LMCC, and we all had like little cubicles, and I didn't have a place to live. Like, I was just like, oh, I'm probably just gonna be at the studio all the time. I don't need to know where I'm gonna live. So I ended up making like a little structure that was like a part of my installation I ended up sleeping in. And yeah, like trying to live here and work, and, you know, having a job, and being, you know, having the freedom that I felt was necessary for me at the time just didn't happen. But I ended up, yeah, squatting there for about like 5 months, and then the winter came, and I got in trouble, and then Lisa Siegel, who's an amazing human being, let me stay in her basement and barter for hanging out and taking care of her kids for a little bit when she was in the studio. But like situations like that like couldn't have happened if, you know, like I didn't meet these artists or had, you know, these relationships that were really genuine, like that were created in moments that, you know, where we were all just trying to like be open to experimentation. So
And by that, you mean like the residency or the like opportunity to inhabit a studio for a year, or the things that allow you to have some freedom within a structure that doesn't usually allow, a city that doesn't usually allow for it.
yeah.
So I think of New York being a really, I mean, it's not free economically, but free place of who you know, you come and can reinvent yourself, or you can be authentically who you are, you know. The transition, the hardest transition I had in Portland, moving to Portland, was that I felt everybody was fake, because they would smile at me, but I didn't understand what that smile meant.
Yeah.
And here, I felt like if I had earned that, like, I knew it was real, and so I was constantly searching for realness, like the old definition of realness,
Right.
not the new one, there, but it does seem like all of the cities, including my own, are becoming like economically challenging for artists and others to like express freedom or radicality, and the important spaces are those ones that you're allowed to change, like somebody who reaches in and says like, here's some support just to be who you are, like Artadia or other grants, or like we have the Warhol regranting initiative, and these like small kind of like bursts of relaxation usually like mean that the artist gets a chance to like really twist things up.
Yeah.
But the day-to-day grind, of course, like wears down the resilience to do that. I don't think it's just a New York thing, but I ask it because we're here. I mean,
Right.
artists feel it in Portland, even though people think it's a Shangri-La. It's like in a housing crisis, and artists are actually making a mass exodus here into LA, I think, because they think if I'm gonna be broke somewhere, I might as well be in the seat of power or something, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's why I went to Berlin, and I went to Stabelschule because it was like a free school that was based on merit. Like if you would get in, you were in there for a year free. So, and I did go to grad school, so I thought, okay, this in lieu of that, because I was really feeling the pressure of being in New York, and everybody has their elevator pitches, and they're just like, this is what my work's about, and I didn't really have that. So I wanted a conversation, so I went to Frankfurt, which ended up being completely not the place to go to want to learn how to speak about your work. But it was a great experience. I had amazing studio visits with, saw a lot of amazing art, beautiful, and went to Berlin, and it cost nothing to be there. It's, a studio. What you get for your dollar in Berlin was so different. So that was a really important,
Can you go back to this thing where you say like it wasn't a good place to learn how to talk about your work? Why? Was there just not an emphasis on that?
No, there wasn't an emphasis on that. It was more like, and I also was, I guess I got there a little late because I was in my late 20s, and everyone was like 18, 19, and it's kind of like too cool for school, like just got out of like high school. And but there was, basically what they're trying to do is reinvent the art school model, so whoever your professor who chooses you gets to lead the class. And my professor was Tobias Rehberger, and he immediately, I noticed, like, he just had like this boys club, and a lot of the artists were making similar work to him, and I just already had done so much and didn't really relate to his work. So I jumped to Mark Lecky's class, and then that was the best thing to do. Bonnie Kaplan took it over, Polina Lewaska, we made films in Poland, like, just like experimenting. But none of that work is, I just feel like, I just went through like a labyrinth and to get here, and all these, like the way that you're curating, I think is really important to have that, for artists to allow them to, have the support to experiment and not really be stuck thinking about the market at all, which I think is a very New York thing anyway. It's not like,
we think about the market in Portland too, but we also like, or at least we try at times to like reject the sensibilities of it. But it infiltrates through like the internet and how students are working and what they're replicating and mimicking. So it's not as pure as maybe it once was, if it ever was. Anyone have any questions? Yes.
I have two questions, and maybe they're kind of related. When you're working with performers, do you have any rules, like don't break the objects, or don't interact with, or don't like talk to the people looking at it? And I guess the related question is, have you ever been disappointed in or frustrated by the performance of performers in your work?
No, because I just don't see it, any mistakes are possible. We basically have like a loose choreography, like these are positions that, that are comfortable for you, that everyone agrees on, and then how and when they do it is up to them. I've never had anybody break anything, but I have had a lot of things like trampled on and stained that, I don't know, I just don't like think about my work like being precious, so I encourage that kind of interaction with it.
Do you think of your role sort of more like a theater director or a choreographer or costume designer or makeup part of it, like everything that goes around the theater performance except being on the stage? Or I don't know, that's when I was seeing that part of it, I was trying to understand how you thought about your role, since you don't ever want to step into the role of the model.
Oh, I have been the model before, but and it will be again, but it's like, I don't know, because I studied painting, and so I think about like them creating a painting for me, but I don't really see it as a theater, like, because I've never had that experience except, through like the punk scene or things like that are more, like these like improvisations on stage. So, but I don't really see it as that. But now that the models are reoccurring, and we're developing like, this language together, I do feel like I'm just developing like what that is,
There's a question here and then back there after.
How do you choose your colors?
I guess it goes back to the Bolivian roots, like all the bright, wild colors that I saw growing up, and also like really not wanting them to be. I've always hated when people are like, "Oh yeah, like that looks like a woman's artwork or whatever." I think that even though they're pleasurable to look at, I think there's some like grittiness and like gross part of, putting two colors together to, I don't know, it's just like intuitive.
In the back?
That was essentially a similar question.
Oh, similar question. Anyone else? Yes.
Is there any relationship between the fact that your models are naked and a lot of the objects that you use within the series are pieces of clothing, and the fact that they seem to be putting it on in a, incorrect manner?
No, not really. I mean, it went from the models being totally bundled to like shedding that and then being painted in different, combinations. So it was never, I don't know, I don't really see it as, it just seems like, the study of the surface.
Do you perceive the documentation of your performances to a certain extent as the artwork itself, in the sense of its frame?
Yeah, well, I really care about the composition. When we're photographing, I usually work with the photographer closely, and I frame everything on my phone, and then he or she goes in and takes the shot. But that's important, I think, being as that, like they weren't really, it's not really meant to be seen again, so it's really like something I care about, but wouldn't like, consider it photography at all. Like I would never show that, like, anyway, except on documentation purposes.
Yes.
I don't know if you already said it, but how do you choose your model? Is there a certain form or
I usually do like a casting and then just base it on who I connect with the most. It's not usually like 100 people to choose from. There's usually 10 and I choose 7, you know. I try not to get anyone who really knows each other, even though it's like the communities are always, you know, connected. Like in Riga, I had 3 models to choose from and I had to choose 2. So 2 of them were dancers and they had been in the same company and they were like best friends, and I didn't want them to do it because I wanted the other art student and the model who, I usually try to base somebody who's used to doing something like this, someone who's not, who's just excited about the work, and then the kind of tension that's created between them is really interesting when it's happening.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask a very New York market question. How are you negotiating the economy with your work? Are you allowing the objects to be sold and then replaced them for the next performance, or how is that?
It hasn't really, like, it's so new to me, but yeah, they are, like, I just started working with the commercial gallery in the summer, and yeah, they're not like multiples, but they are unique and they are for sale. Yeah.
But the people will never go with the work.
Oh, what? No.
People are not for
Never. I mean, I've gotten that question, surprisingly.
Well, I think about like Jamie Eisenstein's practice where she retains the right to inhabit her artworks that she's, you know, made for her body over time. So if you purchase one of them, you know, she can show up to your house and be inside of it, you know, anytime. And so you could write that clause in. Yeah. Anyone else?
I just have one more question.
Sure.
Are the works supposed to be viewed at all like sexually? Like I don't, like for me that I don't, they're so
Yeah.
naturally that I don't find it sexual, but because it is like a female body, do people look at it that way, or is there any?
I don't know. I mean, it's not my intention, but I'm sure everyone's bringing their baggage when they come to looking at this, so I don't know. I can't control it.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thanks again to Artadia.
Yeah.